Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and I want to thank Jackie and all of her staff for putting on another wonderful conference. I'd also like to thank the executive board for inviting us to address all the tribal leaders. I always have to say this because I know, just not because I was ever a tribal elected leader, but I have family that's been in leadership positions for my tribe, and I have to always say that you guys do so much for your people, and without you, there would be really some rough times in the country. And I know it's always difficult. There's never enough time and resources to address everything that you face every day, but I just want to say that you all are tremendously inspiring to me, and I'm always very thankful when I get the opportunity to visit with tribal leaders. So thank you for traveling here today and bringing your issues to the attention of not just the White House, but all the federal officials that have joined us here today. So just want to make sure that we are moving on a good track to fulfilling some of the promises that the President made in Indian country. And if you recall in some of the remarks that the President has said in the past, that we are really looking forward to moving the ball on Indian country in terms of working to make sure that every Native American can realize the American dream, and that goes not just for economic and job security, but it also relates to equal access to the polls, securing your communities, making them safe, having really some important things that I hear from tribal leaders a lot, but I know that are on the forefront, such as healthcare. And I wanted to just note, and I know Jackie talked about this already, that the President, we are paying attention to the things that have been happening this morning, especially related to the Supreme Court. And I appreciate the presentation of the previous speaker, knowing I can't really talk too much about the political aspect of what he said, but really just presenting the facts. But we know that voter discrimination still exists out there. It exists in Indian country, and that while today's decision is a setback in protecting the rights of those voters, it doesn't mean that we're defeated, and the President himself called upon Congress to address this decision, and we should make sure that every citizen, every American has equal access to the polls. And so we want to continue to work on things that sometimes we have decisions that aren't favorable, or that don't align with the things that we would like to see in terms of how we're advancing. But we appreciate Congress's efforts and how they partnered with us in other areas. That partnership is really built upon I don't have to tell you how important it is that we maintain and we strengthen and we enrich the government-to-government, nation-to-nation relationship. And we want this relationship to not only respect your sovereignty, but we want to make sure that you as tribal leaders are directly involved in setting policy priorities, not only of the administration, but we want to work with you on legislative proposals as well. And these are some significant achievements that we've had over the past 4 years, really are a result of the collaborative work that we've had with you. And thankfully, we have a great team, and I rarely say how wonderful it is to work in this administration because of the wonderful people that I work with in the various agencies, but the way that we have been setting forward some of the legislative language is really based upon consultation, and when we are successful, the best example of this, I guess the best two examples of this is VAWA and FEMA. And these are the VAWA reauthorization and the FEMA tribal provision that was included. Those were both proposals that the administration baked and worked on in collaboration with tribal leaders. And we presented them and worked with the Hill, and of course we couldn't do it by ourselves, and really had to collaborate with members of Congress and people that work with members of Congress, their staff, and of course, you know, the voice of Indian country is very loud to many of those members. And we want to, I just want to highlight that as we move forward into the next few years, it's things like that that we would really appreciate, greater partnership, and we know
Get them
that,
from that side, everybody this way, and then go on this side and get them from that way, from all directions.
But we also know that the Department of Justice is going to speak here a little bit about the special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction provision that was included, and how the DOJ and DOI have been burning midnight oil to make sure that we get processed out and we get that implemented as quickly as possible as it relates to the pilot program. And you probably, I'm going to let Dan Hirsch, my colleague from DOJ, who's, you know, I just have to say Sam is one of the people, when I say we have a great team, he's one of the people at DOJ. We really, it means a lot to me how much DOJ has leaned into Indian country and tried to be reflective of the needs and the challenges, addressing the challenges out there. And so we always have internal discussions, and I will say that they've been more than responsive in how we build some of these implementation proposals. There's a lot of things going on within the administration because you guys have been so successful at advocating for Indian people on the Hill. There's a lot of legislation that's passed over the years: Tribal Law and Order Act, the Affordable Care Act. You'll hear from Dr. Liu pretty soon. I think it's tomorrow she's going to speak. There's some important provisions coming down in terms of how we implement some of the non-IHS provisions, but IHS is implicated, as you well know. And we're starting in probably one of the most critical phases of enrollment. And so she's going to talk a little bit about how IHS is engaged in that conversation, and then what IHS is doing. And I know the tribal leaders are involved with the staff and the secretary over there, but that's just one agency. And then we also have the Tribal Law and Order Act, and DOJ and DOI and HHS, for that matter, have been working overtime to make sure that we're following the provisions of the Tribal Law and Order Act, and we're doing it in a way that is reflective and responsive to how, because this is what policy is. There's a law, and you can follow the law, but there's also, I call it the squishy area, and so we want to be as mindful and respectful of making sure that the provisions are not going to hurt anybody or do bad things when we work on them and implement them. But really, this is where we appreciate your participation in the consultations. We appreciate all of the things that you bring to the table when I know that there's a lot of consultation out there, but we do appreciate the NCAI's role, but also the individual tribe's voice in how we proceed. And we can talk at a really high 30,000-foot level, but at the end of the day, the tribes and the Indian people that you represent are going to be living with these provisions. So it's really important. We know that when we don't pay attention to some of the things that Indian country tells us, that the results over time, over the decades, have been not so great and not so kind to our people. I guess my people. I have a difficult time with my pronouns because I would say my people and my Indian people, but really, as the administration, it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we're reflective. The other piece that is going into effect is the Stafford Act amendments, and we want to make sure that you continue to have direct access to federal funding during major disasters and emergency situations. And too often, we know that some of the when tribes experience these disasters and these emergency weather-related calamities, that it's really difficult sometimes to get your state to listen to you. And the Administrator Fugate heard from Indian country loud and clear, and was a huge voice for you, even in the early days, these were early deliberations, he went out and talked to Indian Country and came in right away when I was in intergovernmental affairs and was advocating very strongly to make sure that the tribes could get direct requests to the president and didn't have to go through the state. And that's a belief that he had early on, and I'm really thankful that he took on that. And really has been one of the most successful FEMA administrators that this country's seen, and knowing that he understands and gets what Indian Country has been saying for a long time, and will put himself out there, not only within the administration, but with his meetings during the discussions on Sandy, the Hurricane Sandy. And so we have wonderful partners and wonderful people that are advocating for things that you tell them, but I also want to give a shout out to the ways that the tribes help each other, because in some of my discussions that I've had with FEMA, and I've joined them on calls, and I've said, I'm just always really proud, because you never see so many tribes come together with, I think Shinnecock, when they were on the phone, and the various tribal leaders from all over the country were on there, and they were just saying how, whatever you need, you were going to send fire people or whatever it was. And I think that's really admirable, and it's a testament to not only your generosity, but also your compassion for one another. And it's really remarkable to, and it makes me really proud when we see so many tribes talking about how can we help, how can we Greg Pyle, Chief Pyle from Choctaw, was just talking about what he was doing for not only his tribal members, but people that were hurt in the recent tornado that struck the Oklahoma area. And I just want to thank you for that leadership, because I think it's things like that where you can really see the values of Indian Country shine through. And you might see it in other areas, but it's very apparent and a lot stronger, I believe, in Indian Country. The other thing is, there's some good things that I wanted to talk about. There's also some difficult things. The previous speaker talked about the sequester, and we have made a lot of significant strides in policy areas, but we are going to face some really serious challenges that are going to hinder this progress, because President Obama has been dealing with trying to address sequester in a way that makes sense. He's made, we've all made clear at the White House and in the agencies that these cuts are real, and they're deep and they're painful. And I don't need to tell you this, because I hear it all the time from Indian Country, that this isn't evident, I think, anywhere else so as much as it is starkly in Indian Country. We've seen and you faced, as well as the federal government, cuts to human services, Indian health services, law enforcement, BIA schools. Economic and development programs have been disrupted, and we've been able to stave off some of the things, but these are hurting some of the most vulnerable populations in your communities. And we remain committed to working with Congress to do the right thing and handle the sequester in a smart and responsible way. But we really need your partnership in making sure that your voices are heard and your stories are heard. You showed the power of your voice in VAWA and how you all came together. And we really would appreciate that same type of partnership as we try to respond to the sequestration and the dire consequences it's going to have on Indian communities. The other thing that I'm just going to mention briefly is that the administration is working to provide a solution on the continuous shortfall of contract support costs, and that the Supreme Court decision in RAMA, this has created a really difficult situation, and it's made more difficult by the budget cuts. We've proposed an interim solution that is in the president's budget, and we've heard loud and clear from Indian Country that the proposal isn't something that folks like, and that's been said over and over again, but we do look forward to hearing what other solutions could be out there. I think the Assistant Secretary Washburn is going to be visiting with folks at the conference here later this week on this issue. And also Dr. Rubido is going to be sending out a consultation letter. Did you already send that out? So we've probably already received a list of consultations, but we really look forward to working with you on this, and that we are committed to meaningful consultation to find solutions that are responsive not only to Indian country, but take into consideration the budget hardships that the Indian budget line items are facing. So the last thing that I wanted to mention, just briefly, I guess the second to the last thing, is the Indian Child Welfare Act decision that came down today. And I'm sure everybody in here knows already, and I heard Jackie talking about it earlier, but the Supreme Court issued its decision in an adoption case involving the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to read this part because I think it's really important to remember why Congress enacted ICWA. And it was to address the alarmingly high percentage of Indian children being placed in non-Indian adoptive homes, in recognition that there is no greater resource. This is quoting from the law. There's no greater resource that is more vital to the continued existence and integrity of Indian tribes than their children. End quote. That's what Congress said, why they passed ICWA. And the main issue decided by the Supreme Court was whether or not South Carolina courts properly barred a South Carolina couple from adopting a child over the objection of the child's biological father, a member of the Cherokee Nation. And the Supreme Court decided that the two provisions of ICWA that the South Carolina court relied upon were inapplicable. The United States, as a lot of people already know, filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court in support of the custody of the father. And although the court reached a different outcome, the majority opinion focused on the circumstances of this particular case. While we're studying the decision, and although I'm not a legal scholar, I'm confident that ICWA will continue to provide important protections for Indian children and families and tribes, and that we know that there's a lot at stake when we talk about Indian Child Welfare Act. And this administration is committed to working in collaboration with tribes. And we've already met as federal agencies, the Department of Interior, Department of Justice, and Department of Health and Human Services, and others to oversee the coordination of the implementation of ICWA at the state level. We know that Indian children and their families receive specific protections identified under ICWA, and that we want to work with tribes to strengthen their role in these proceedings.